The atmosphere aboard Earth's newest colony station, Argonaut, was tense. The distant hum of the engines, which usually brought comfort to the station's inhabitants, now felt like a countdown. Captain Jason Aldridge stood before the holographic display in his command center, eyes scanning the incoming data from the outer rim. His fingers hovered over the controls but didn't touch them. The message was clear. The Gorkal were coming. The Gorkal were notorious throughout the galaxy, a race of genetically enhanced warriors who had conquered and destroyed countless civilizations. Their name alone made every military command in the sector tremble. They were known for their raw strength, biological enhancements, and nearly indestructible combat gear. The Gorkal believed in domination through force, and they viewed any species they encountered as prey to be hunted or enslaved. Yet here they were, approaching Argonaut, a station on the edge of human expansion. The reason? A challenge. The Gorkal wanted to test humanity's combat readiness, believing that the human race was beneath them and weak. To them, the human military was laughable, a pitiful collection of underdogs with no place among the galactic powers. Their arrogance knew no bounds, and this arrogance was about to collide with the very thing they had underestimated: human ingenuity. Captain Aldridge tapped the comms console. Lieutenant Torres, set up a meeting with the Gorkal envoy. I need to speak with their leader. Prepare the security team, just in case. The reply came swift and sharp. Yes, Captain. We've intercepted their communication. It seems they'll be landing within the hour. Jason turned from the console, his mind racing. What was he going to do? The Gorkal's challenge was simple, a competition of combat skills. But this wasn't a typical training drill or routine exercise. It was a battle of pride. If they lost, the consequences could be disastrous, especially for the fledgling human colonies. The Gorkal had a habit of turning their mockery into slaughter. In the command center, Lieutenant Kira Donovan stood at attention, waiting for her orders. A veteran of the human military, Kira had fought on the front lines of the colony wars, where the risks were high and the enemy merciless. Her calm demeanor and sharp instincts had made her one of the station's top combat officers. Kira, Aldridge said, turning to her with a steely gaze. We're about to face a race that doesn't know the meaning of the word underestimate. We need to show them exactly what humanity is made of. She nodded, her expression unwavering. Let's prove them wrong, Captain. As the Gorkal ship descended, the stakes of the coming challenge were clear. The aliens were about to face the greatest weapon humanity had, its spirit. The Gorkal ship touched down on Argonaut, the massive craft casting a long shadow over the docking bay. The air seemed to crackle with tension as its armored hull clanged against the metal floor, sending a shiver through the station. With the sound of heavy boots echoing through the air, the first of the Gorkal warriors stepped out. They were everything the legends had promised. Towering figures, each easily 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick, reptilian scales that glinted like living metal. Their eyes burned with a mix of disdain and amusement, assessing the humans around them, as though they were insects beneath their feet. Rax, the Gorkal leader, stepped forward with an air of arrogance. His armor shimmered with intricate designs, biotech enhancements that amplified his natural strength, enabling him to survive in the harshest environments and recover from near-fatal wounds. Behind him, 2 more warriors followed, their hulking forms dwarfing the human soldiers standing by. The Gorkal scanned the human combat personnel like predators, sizing up prey, their sneers growing more evident with every passing moment. Captain Aldridge stood tall, flanked by Kira Donovan and several senior officers. He stepped forward to meet the Gorkal delegation, his eyes unwavering despite the overwhelming size and presence of the aliens. "Welcome to Argonaut," Aldridge said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of defiance. "I trust your journey was satisfactory." Rax's gaze flicked over to the human captain, dismissing him without a second thought. "Satisfactory? I expected more from the species that would challenge us," Rax said, his voice deep and rumbling, like a thunderstorm on the horizon. But I suppose even you know when you are outmatched." He turned his attention to the human combat suits, lined up neatly beside their respective pilots. His lips curled into a smirk. This is what you call armor." He laughed loudly, the sound booming off the station's walls. "It is no wonder your kind has not yet been wiped from existence." The Gorkal warriors behind him snickered, clearly enjoying the mockery. They sized up the suits with disdain. The human armor, lightweight and made of composite alloys, seemed primitive compared to the biomechanical exoskeletons of the Gorkal, which fused their bodies with enhanced technology. The human suits lacked the obvious advantages of energy shields or force fields, features every Gorkal was accustomed to. Kira Donovan, standing beside Aldridge, clenched her jaw, but didn't react. She had heard such insults before, but this time felt different. This time, they weren't simply insulting her, they were mocking humanity. "Perhaps we should let your warriors experience it firsthand," Aldridge said, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. "Rax, if you're so confident in your superiority, I'm sure you'll have no problem proving it by donning our combat gear." The alien leader's eyes narrowed, his nostrils flaring in irritation. "I will wear your armor," he growled, "and show you what real power looks like." As Rax stepped forward to suit up, the tension in the air grew palpable. The Gorkal warriors gathered around, eagerly watching, as the first trial began. The moment Rax stepped into the human armor, the mockery would become reality. Or so they thought. Rax stood before the human combat suit, sizing it up with a look of complete disdain. The suit, designed for maximum agility, looked like little more than a bulky shell compared to the advanced exoskeleton he was used to. Still, his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. With a grunt, he stepped into the suit, his massive frame squeezing into the tight-fitting material. He had to hunch over slightly to accommodate the human design, but he didn't care. He would show them the true meaning of power. The moment the suit's systems activated, Rax felt a jolt of surprise. The sensors in the helmet scanned his face, calibrating to his alien physiology, and a soft voice in his ear provided instructions in perfect Gorkal. "Welcome to the human combat system. Please calibrate your movements for optimal performance." Rax growled, his irritation building. "I am already optimized," he muttered, flexing his immense muscles, eager to prove that no suit, human or otherwise, could restrain him. He wasn't used to these human limitations, but he would quickly break them. Captain Aldridge, Kira, and the other human soldiers watched silently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. This was the moment. If the Gorkal underestimated the human suit, they would soon see the truth. The first test was simple. Target practice. A series of holographic enemies appeared in front of Rax. They darted about the simulation room, moving with high speed and precision. Rax's immense strength gave him an advantage in raw power, but the human suit wasn't designed for brute force. It was engineered to enhance reflexes, fluidity, and coordination. Rax took a deep breath and lunged forward, his massive arms swinging with devastating force. The first target shattered under the force of his blow, but the suit's advanced gyros failed to adjust to his movements in time. Rax's next strike missed entirely, the target slipping past his clumsy reach. Frustrated, he swung again, but the suit's servos couldn't keep up with his speed. His right arm overextended, and the momentum threw him off balance. He crashed into the floor with a heavy thud. The Gorkal warriors watching from the sidelines roared with laughter. Rax was humiliated. He struggled to his feet, the suit restricting his movement even further as he tried to recover. He tried to move faster, but the more he pushed, the more the suit resisted. The human armor wasn't built for raw strength. It was built for finesse, for the quick, precise adjustments of someone who had mastered their body and their surroundings. Rax's frustration grew. "This is not possible," he muttered, attempting to reconfigure the suit's settings. But no matter how much force he applied, he couldn't make the armor respond as he wanted. Every movement was like moving through molasses, every strike more awkward than the last. Kira Donovan, standing across the room, couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction. She had seen this before, alien warriors who thought they could conquer humanity with nothing but muscle. But now, she saw Rax struggling with something human soldiers mastered daily: the art of adaptation. "You're trying to overpower the suit," she called out, her voice calm and measured. "It's not about strength, it's about control." Rax's glare could have burned through steel, but Kira's words were already sinking in. The Gorkal leader didn't have the finesse to make the suit work for him, and that realization was just the beginning of his downfall. Rax's frustration mounted as he struggled to regain his footing. The more he tried to force his way through the human suit, the more it seemed to fight him back. His muscles, honed over decades of battle and enhanced by Gorkal technology, rippled with power. But each time he attempted to use that power, the suit's systems rejected his raw strength. It was as if the armor itself had a mind of its own, and it was determined not to let him dominate it. "Come on," Rax roared, slamming his fist into the ground in a desperate attempt to steady himself. The impact caused a small tremor in the room, but the suit's sensors adjusted quickly, recalibrating for the sudden force. He looked down, growling as the suit responded too slowly to his needs. His hands, large and calloused from years of combat, struggled to grip the human-designed control panel embedded in the suit's forearm. Each movement felt clumsy, like trying to pilot a craft with the wrong manual. Kira Donovan watched the alien leader with a growing sense of awe, not because of his strength, but because of his utter lack of adaptability. She had seen soldiers from all over the galaxy try to defeat human tactics, from the bipedal Throgs to the insectoid Varths. But none had been as unaware of their own limitations as Rax. What he was experiencing now wasn't just a struggle with the suit, it was a complete failure to understand the human approach to combat. The suit didn't require brute force, it required finesse, precision, and a clear mind. "Rax," Kira called out, her voice calm but cutting through his frustration. "You're not using it the way it's meant to be used. You can't overpower the suit. You need to work with it." Rax's eyes narrowed at her, his pride wounded. He hated being spoken to like this, especially by a human. He was a Gorkal warrior, a conqueror of worlds, a living legend. But the more he tried to move, the more he realized Kira was right. His strength alone wasn't enough. He attempted a more calculated move this time, his massive legs attempting to crouch into a fighting stance. But his broad shoulders were too wide for the narrow range of motion the suit allowed. The armor seemed to constrict around him as he tried to position himself for a strike, as though it were actively restraining him. He growled in frustration, sweat now beading on his forehead. The human soldiers, meanwhile, watched with quiet amusement as the Gorkal leader stumbled through the trial. Kira, though, saw a moment of clarity flicker in Rax's eyes. He wasn't giving up. Not yet, but the realization had begun to sink in. His raw power, the foundation of the Gorkal's pride, was not enough to overcome the limitations of the human armor. "Let it go, Rax," Kira said softly, watching as the Gorkal warrior exhaled deeply, his chest heaving. "This armor is not about muscle. It's about knowing when to hold back and when to move swiftly." Rax stood still for a long moment, his shoulders sagging as he processed the truth of her words. The Gorkal leader, usually a living force of destruction, had met his match not in strength, but in understanding. Rax stood still in the middle of the simulation room, the hum of the suit's systems the only sound in the air. His massive chest heaved with each breath, and beads of sweat dripped down his face, though the Gorkal warrior never once wiped them away. He was proud, too proud to show weakness. But the realization had come, and with it, a sense of humility that gnawed at his core. He wasn't going to overpower the suit. He wasn't going to win through brute strength. As he slowly straightened his posture, Kira Donovan remained watching from across the room, her eyes locked on his every move. Captain Aldridge stood beside her, his arms crossed, but his expression unreadable. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the turning point in the challenge. It wasn't just about showing the Gorkal their place anymore. It was about proving something deeper. Humanity was about adaptability, intelligence, and tactical prowess, not just raw muscle. Rax had to learn that. For a moment, the two sides stood in silence, a quiet intensity hanging in the air. Rax, shaking off his initial frustration, took a long breath and lifted his hands in a gesture of surrender, not to the humans, but to the suit itself. He wasn't going to bend the armor to his will. Instead, he needed to flow with it. The Gorkal were fierce warriors, but they were not known for finesse. And now, Rax had to abandon his instinctual fighting style and adapt to something completely foreign. "All right," Rax grunted, adjusting the helmet and focusing on the HUD that flickered before his eyes. He hadn't been using the suit's functions properly. He had only been relying on his strength, which was now proving useless. "Let's see what this thing can really do." Captain Aldridge nodded to Kira, who gave a subtle but knowing smile. She stepped forward to the center of the room and called out, "This next test is yours. Rax, you've got to work with the armor, not against it. You'll face me." Rax's eyes narrowed. "You? A human?" Kira's smile didn't falter. "Yes, and you'll find out that it's not just your strength that will win a fight." She assumed a ready stance, her body coiled like a spring, calm but ready for the slightest movement. Rax glared at her, his muscles still rippling with power beneath the suit, but his movements now slower, more deliberate. He raised his fists, preparing to charge, but this time, he hesitated. Something about Kira's calm was unsettling. She wasn't going to charge at him like some mindless brute. She was thinking. Rax hesitated just long enough for Kira to spring into action. She darted to his side with blinding speed, slipping past his reach, and before he could react, she landed a precise strike to his side, the suit's sensors recording the hit. Rax staggered but didn't fall. His initial instinct was to retaliate with raw force, but this time, he didn't rush forward. Instead, he pivoted and tracked Kira's movements. Kira wasn't done. She kept her movements fluid, weaving around him, constantly staying one step ahead. For the first time, Rax felt the full weight of the human approach. Fluidity, precision, and control. She wasn't trying to overpower him, but rather to outsmart him. Rax growled low in his throat, but now he was beginning to understand. This wasn't a fight of strength, it was a fight of tactics. And suddenly, for the first time, the Gorkal leader was no longer in control. Rax gritted his teeth as Kira circled him like a shadow, never allowing him to settle into a rhythm. Each time he swung a powerful fist toward her, she was already a step ahead, weaving just out of reach, her movements fluid and precise. She wasn't trying to overpower him. She was simply outmaneuvering him. He growled and tried to anticipate her next move, but every time he thought he had her cornered, she slipped away with almost preternatural speed. His large frame was a weapon of destruction, but it was cumbersome, and the suit, though designed for agility, was still built to accommodate his bulk. Kira, on the other hand, was light and nimble, her movements as precise as a predator stalking its prey. "You're not using the suit's potential," Kira called out, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "Your power is a tool, but it's not the answer here. Let the suit work for you, Rax, not against you." Rax, still struggling to adapt, bared his teeth in frustration. He could feel his pride slipping away with each dodge, each failed strike. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He, a Gorkal, a creature built for battle, being outclassed by a human. It was infuriating. He lunged forward, his fist crashing through the air, but Kira was already gone, slipping behind him. She didn't attack immediately, but instead used his own momentum to guide him off balance. She tapped a precise spot on the back of his knee, a pressure point that caused his leg to buckle slightly. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it forced him to stagger. Rax's rage flared. His mind, still accustomed to using raw power to crush any opponent, fought against the logic of this fight. He knew his strength, his enhancements, were no match for Kira's speed. He had to adapt. He had to learn. The sound of his heavy breath filled the room as Rax's shoulders sagged slightly. For a moment, Kira's words echoed in his mind. "Let the suit work for you." He stopped for a second, trying to steady his breath, trying to think through the haze of his anger. Then, with a deep, controlled exhale, Rax began to shift. Instead of charging at Kira, he slowed his movements, pacing himself. His strikes were no longer reckless. They were deliberate. The suit responded in kind, its sensors adjusting to his more controlled movements, offering support where needed. The weight of his punches lessened, and he began to feel the way the armor adapted to his frame, how it amplified his natural abilities when used with precision rather than force. Kira, noticing the change, paused for a fraction of a second. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Rax's eyes locked onto hers, and this time, instead of charging forward like a beast, he moved with purpose. He feigned a heavy strike to her left side, but as she instinctively shifted to block, he darted to the right, his fist connecting with the suit's reinforced torso section. The blow wasn't a full-on attack, but it was calculated, a glancing strike that knocked Kira back a step. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a sign of progress. Kira stood there, watching him with a knowing look, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion. "Good. You're starting to get it." Rax stood tall, feeling the suit now working with him instead of against him. The initial struggle had transformed into something else, a partnership. The human armor was not his enemy. It was his ally. And the Gorkal warrior felt a spark of respect for the ingenuity of the humans. This battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Rax wasn't sure it would end the way he expected. Rax stood at the center of the simulation room, his breathing heavy, but controlled. For the first time since he'd stepped into the human combat suit, he felt a sense of fluidity, a sense of understanding. He was no longer trying to overpower the suit. He was beginning to trust it. The heavy thrum of his heartbeat echoed in his ears, but his mind was clear. He wasn't just a brute force anymore. He was a warrior adapting, evolving. Kira, her eyes still locked onto him, slowly began to circle again. Her stance was patient, almost casual, but Rax could see the subtle readiness in every movement. He wasn't the only one learning. She was a mirror, a constant challenge, and she wasn't going to make it easy for him. The game had changed. Now it was about precision, timing, and anticipating the next move. Rax clenched his fists, the suit's sensors registering the shift in his demeanor. The power coursing through his muscles was still there, but now he wielded it with purpose. His mind began to function like the precise gears of a war machine. He wasn't just thinking about his strikes anymore. He was thinking about where she'd be, where he needed to be, and how to make every movement count. Kira lunged forward, a blur of motion aimed at his midsection. Rax's instincts screamed at him to react with brute force, to crush her with a counterstrike. But instead, he remembered her words. "It's not about strength, it's about control." With a grunt, he shifted his weight, pivoting on his foot, and let her attack pass just inches away from his torso. In that instant, the suit responded. Its gyros adjusted for his movement, its servos helping him keep his balance as Kira's attack narrowly missed. And then, before she could recover, Rax closed the gap, his left arm coming down in a controlled strike toward her shoulder. The blow landed, but it wasn't a devastating hit. It wasn't meant to knock her out of the fight. It was meant to test the waters. His fist didn't crush her. It nudged her off balance, just enough to give him a tactical advantage. Kira staggered but quickly recovered, her agility once again evident as she darted back out of his reach. She grinned. "Nice move, Rax. You're adapting." Rax's mouth curled into a small smile, though it was a rare thing for him to show. The arrogance of his early behavior had been replaced by something deeper, a grudging respect for his opponent. The fight had turned from mockery into something more meaningful, and he found himself relishing the challenge. "Not bad for a human," Rax muttered under his breath. The words were meant as a taunt, but there was no malice in them. Instead, it was acknowledgement. Kira's eyes flickered with something akin to pride. "You're not so bad yourself," she replied, her voice light, but with a sharp edge. "But this isn't over." Rax's heart beat faster, and the suit amplified his adrenaline. He was no longer just a Gorkal warrior fighting in a human suit. He was a fighter who had evolved into something more, a being who understood that strength was only one part of the equation. The real battle was in the mind. The turning tide had shifted. Rax was no longer the challenger. He was beginning to embody the very spirit of the human military. Adaptable, smart, and relentless. The tension in the room was palpable as Rax and Kira faced off again. The air between them crackled with the weight of their unspoken understanding. What had started as a mockery of the human combat suit was now a battle of wills, a contest of minds as much as muscles. Rax was no longer just trying to break through the armor's limitations. He was learning to work with it, to let it complement his own strength rather than fight against it. Kira's eyes were sharp, watching him carefully. She knew that Rax had begun to grasp the concept, but she wasn't about to give him an easy victory. With a quick step, she darted forward, feinting an attack to his right shoulder. Rax shifted instinctively, his armor adjusting to his movements, the sensors in the suit responding faster than his own reflexes. He let her move in, anticipating her next strike. This time, he didn't rush to meet her head-on. Instead, he shifted his weight, letting her pass just beyond his reach. The suit's enhanced balance systems kept him steady, and in that brief moment, he made his move. He used his momentum to pivot, his left leg sweeping toward Kira's midsection, forcing her back with the sudden, precise movement. The strike wasn't meant to hurt her. It was about disrupting her rhythm. Kira, startled by the change in his tactics, took a quick step back, but Rax was already on the move again, not with force, but with calculated speed. He reached out, his hand catching her wrist in a firm, controlled grip, not to overpower her but to control her movement. His strength wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a tool. Kira paused for just a moment, her breath quickening as she processed his shift in tactics. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. He had learned the most important lesson. Combat wasn't about dominating your opponent with sheer strength. It was about anticipating, adapting, and outsmarting them. Rax tightened his grip just enough to hold her in place, not in a hostile manner, but in a way that showed his newfound control. "You've taught me well, human," he said, his voice low and steady. "But the fight isn't over until one of us can't move." Kira met his gaze, a flicker of admiration flashing in her eyes. She could see that the Gorkal leader had not only survived the challenge, but had truly adapted. He was no longer the arrogant warrior who mocked the human suit. He was a different kind of fighter now, a more dangerous one. A fighter who had learned to think before he struck. With a final graceful movement, Kira released herself from his hold, stepping back and raising a hand. "All right, Rax. You've passed. You've learned the human way of fighting." Rax straightened, a sense of satisfaction filling him, though his pride was no longer as sharp as it had been. The Gorkal warrior, once so sure of his superiority, now stood beside Kira as a fellow combatant, not just an adversary. "Maybe there's more to your species than I thought," he said, a rare note of respect in his voice. The room fell silent as the realization settled over the two of them. They had fought not to win, but to understand. And in doing so, they had found a new respect for one another, not just as enemies, but as equals. It wasn't just the battle that had changed, it was everything that came after. The future of the galaxy now felt a little different, a little more uncertain, but also filled with possibilities. Rax, the mighty Gorkal leader, had learned something crucial that day. And the humans had shown him that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in force, but in adaptability and the willingness to learn.